I assumed you wanted this recorded. Amy,
Yeah.
I could stop if needed. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think
the way through that.
good. Welcome, Sam, Victoria, or Tori, I think. Alexander. Kudos, Patrick, for adding some questions already. So I'm going to give people like another minute to join, but if you just joined, I'm going to put the notes document in the chat already. So please, I'll put it one more time. I saw Ramon just joined. Hello, Ramon. Please go ahead and sign in to the notes document in the roll call section. Yeah, we'll get started here in just a minute.
Hi, Amy.
Hello. Hey, Matthias.
Hey.
Welcome, Cole. Welcome, Richard. Okay, one more time. Sorry to spam everybody that's been here, but I'm going to put the notes document link one more time in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Cool. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. So this is a new sort of format for this session. It's going to be a little bit more interactive. So just in case you didn't see the sort of announcement for how this is going to work, we had a really awesome session during the ESIP winter meeting bringing cloud native science down to earth. And I've asked some of those speakers to come back and basically join us for a formal, informal, ask me anything type of session so that we can generate some questions organically or based off of what we talked about during the ESIP winter meeting in this session. So if you want a sort of reminder to jog your memory about what we talked about, I'm going to add the notes. Right now I'm going to paste in the chat the notes from our ESIP winter meeting. So if you want to sort of jog your memory about what people talked about during that session, what the presentations were on, go ahead and check out that document. And so what we're going to do after our sort of announcement section is I'm going to ask everybody to click on that Slido link that Jim posted the Slido link in the chat as well. So you can start asking questions there. But before we get started into the questions section, let me see, is this the right? There's also a lot of good questions that were generated during the winter meeting itself. So if you want to check out the old questions, please go there. Although be careful, I'd prefer it if we generate all the new questions in the new Slido link. So don't get confused. That is the one that I just posted is the Slido from the winter meeting, and then we'll use the Slido that Jim posted for this meeting. Okay, so with that, our experts here that we've had today are Ryan Abernathey, Anne Fouilloux, Matthias. I mean, everybody here is probably actually an expert in some regard, but the people who presented in the winter meeting are those three people, as well as Sam Roy. And I'm trying to see, I know that Paige was going to try and join, but Paige Martin is on a train right now. So I'm not sure if she's actually able to join, which is fine. So this can be a group discussion. So please, you can target your questions at the speakers themselves, or you can ask more open-ended questions. And I think anybody here might have their own unique perspective. I did want to leave a little bit of time for any announcements. So I don't have any announcements at the moment other than general, shout out for the Pangeo showcase. I think there's another Pangeo showcase on this Wednesday. Rich, I think, is on the call. You can maybe tell me what the showcase is for this Wednesday.
Actually, Jim, you know, right? Don't call. I know it.
I do. It's cryosphere, but I'll let Ryan actually give the real title.
It is CryoCloud, accelerating discovery for NASA cryosphere communities with open cloud infrastructure.
Cool. Yeah, so Pangea Showcase on Wednesday. Let me put the link to that actually in the. But are there any
Thanks,
other
Ryan. I'll get that for you.
Are there any other announcements for this group about ESIP or other events that people want to make others aware of?
I just wanted to let people know that that Jim actually over the weekend, I think, updated some of the showcase talk stuff. Like people were looking for the data tree talk, and that's up there now, and a couple other ones. And so that they're filling in. We didn't have anything from this year until this, till this just a few days ago. So, but now, yeah. So I've already shared those with several people who are asking about them.
Nice. So those are the recordings are updated.
Yeah, the Zenodo links in the right, Jim, and the Pangeo playlist, which we should probably try to curate a little bit too. There's a lot of good talks that we should probably add in there.
I'll throw a few links in there, and also I don't want to steal ESIP credit, but ESIP has also posted the winter meeting notes. I guess we haven't actually formally said that since the winter meeting, so those are also up, and I'll dig a link up for those.
Nice. Other announcements?
Just a quick one. Everybody should go to SciPy. It's the best meeting.
Yeah, it's so hard.
And it's going to be in Austin again, and who knows where it's going to be next time.
Cool. Yeah, there is a really good article about Austin actually in a recent New Yorker article I highly recommend. Okay. If there's nothing else, I'm going to, sort of ask everybody to now click on this Slido link, which I will put in one more time. And big kudos to Patrick and Rich for putting questions in there in advance. But yeah, I'm basically going to give everybody about 5 minutes to brainstorm some questions. And we're just going to sort of, if anybody is not clear on the instructions, let me know. But otherwise, we're just going to sort of sit here jointly in silence and brainstorm. I should have made this clear too. You can also just read other people's questions and vote on them. Okay, I don't see a lot of new questions being generated, so I think let's get started with the first question. And if people have questions as we go along, please feel free to add them. And so I'm also going to sort of distribute the load across like what type, who's asking the questions. So I'm going to start with this question. How can we provide cloud native access without having users hard code physical storage locations? So once an S3 path is in user's code, if we move data, it breaks. And yeah, I'll go ahead and go to Matthias. Thanks.
I mean, it doesn't completely solve the issue, but you could just use stack basically and point to the stack file and then use stack tooling to read the assets basically. And if that changes then it would basically not be seen by the user in the end. Of course, the stack URL could also change at some point, but maybe for metadata files, it's a bit easier to keep them in a distinct place or provide a like canonical URL. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, Patrick, is there a reason you don't think stack would work?
Well, I think so. There's, well, I don't think stack would work because people have a tendency to hard code things once they can put a path somewhere. So there is that. As soon as you start providing a URL, it's hard to kind of undo that. And I think that, you know, maybe also somewhere in this question is that it seems like we had these problems solved with HTTP, where that abstracts a little bit, where the resource is actually being stored and held and how it's being served and those kinds of things. And so maybe I'm wondering a little if there's any traction behind kind of serving things out of the cloud, but using more traditional style URLs to decouple from any particular vendor, region, bucket, asset or organization, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Ryan, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, this is a great question, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about recently. I would say, like in what we've done in Pangeo, we've gone through like a few iterations, starting from doing exactly what you're saying, hard coding paths to S3 or whatever object storage provider you use. That whether it's a GeoTIFF or a Parquet file or a ZAR group. I've come to the conclusion that S3 is really the wrong abstraction for us to be using, at least for users to be seen directly. There's a lot of issues, like you can't even easily rename things in S3. Like you just have to like delete objects and recreate them. So it doesn't have a lot of the file system like semantics that we're used to. One pattern a lot of people use, and Matthias alluded to this, is to use a catalog. And a catalog allows you to create some indirection between the thing that's being asked for, can have its own namespace and own conventions, and the S3 path. And therefore, it can refer to an object by its stack or whatever. In Pangeo, we've also used intake. Like there's a lot of different catalog formats you could use, but the point is that they provide an indirection. It still, though, doesn't solve the problem of mutability of the underlying data reference. And to solve that problem, I really think we need to be taking a page out of how we think about working with code. We need to define the idea of an immutable reference to data, ideally based on cryptographically verified hashes, such that when we ask for a certain object, we're always getting that exact object we expect, or else something will fail. We get this in code using Git, right? So we can check out a Git repository, point it to a commit hash, and we know we will always be getting that code. And that's how all production systems work that have critical code dependencies. So I believe we have to move that direction with data. And in fact, this is a key feature of the data lake platform we're building in Earthmover, is a version control system that allows for immutable commits and referencing data by their commit. So this is a great question pointing at a place where there's a lot of development work that needs to happen.
Ryan, are you talking about hashing the URL or hashing the file itself? Because file hashes have existed for decades, right? It's not a new thing.
Sure, file hashes have existed for decades, but we don't refer to data by their file hash unless you're using a content addressable storage system like IPFS. Whereas when we're using Git, when you point to a Git commit hash, it's not just a random identifier. It's actually the Merkle tree, hash of all of the files that have gone into the data up to that point. So, for example, if the data were somehow corrupted, that hash would
that
be
solves
invalid.
corruption issue, but it doesn't solve the immutability of the path, right? Because you can have the same exact TIFF file in two separate paths, and you will get the same hash for the file, because the paths are varied, but the existing file is the same, right?
I think this might be a little bit implementation specific. I guess all I'm trying to say is, like, when you point at a GitHub repository and a specific commit hash and a path within that repository, you can feel confident you're always getting the same code back. And so I think similar experiences are possible for data, but exactly how you implement them is a complex question.
Okay, thanks.
I didn't quite get that. So, okay. Oh, I see, Anne, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to compliment that you probably can use some persistent identifier. So like a digital object identifier, you can change the address of the data behind, but you still always have the same digital object identifier that will resolve to the data.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I just wanted to add that, like, another approach to avoiding hard-coded URLs is to do it is to actually query like the API and an API, right? Although I guess you have a API URL that I suppose could change, but that's the approach that the planetary computer takes. Like, every notebook starts off with a stat query to the API.
Yeah. So Ryan said, if you can change the data underlying a DOI, is it really persistent though? Yeah. Okay.
So you don't change the data itself, you change the location of the data. So you can change the address, like a web address. So sorry, I was probably not very clear.
I thought once created DOIs were immutable. I mean, there can be versions of a DOI, but a specific DOI version should always resolve to the exact same digital object. Otherwise, it's not a persistent identifier, right?
Yeah, it resolves the same object, but if the location of the data change, you can ask to change and to put to the location. But it has to be exactly identical. So I don't know the technical details.
But that's just like an honor system, right? Like, there's no cryptographic verification that the data are unchanged.
I guess there are like maybe a checksum. I don't know. I don't know the details, but it would be
depends on the
to know.
provider. Yeah, if you have like Zenodo, they have an MD5 or a SHA-256 hash for file verification. So they do actually check whether you change something in the existing file.
Yeah, and so Zenodo is a great example. It works very well, but Zenodo is really slow. So it's not, if you put your data in Zenodo, it's no longer having all the benefits that we would want from cloud native storage. So how do we recreate that same verifiability for data with the performance we expect from cloud storage?
Isn't hash an extension, a stack extension? I may be wrong here, but isn't that true? Like, can't you just add a MD5 or SHA's 256 hash in the JSON that describes a stack object? Matthias, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, you can. I think it's in the file extension, and then it's multi-hash. Yeah.
Perfect.
Nice.
But I mean, you can just change the hash. Right? Like, there's no guarantee that you can't change the hash. Like, what's needed is a direct link between the identifier and the verification of the hash. But you can always store a hash. Like S3 has hashes. Like you can get the MD5 hash of any object in S3, right? But what's needed is to refer to the data by its hash. That's, you know, that's what Git does, and that's what content addressable storage does.
Sure, there are projects like that. There's a project out of Stanford from the Starling Lab. They are doing something similar for basically all the images that come into newspaper reporting and media that's used sometimes. So they have their own version of hashing. I pasted the link if you want to check it out. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to think about like what is immutable truly.
Well, I'm just going to read. So Peter's question was, how about versioning of data like collection processing? Should each version get a new DOI? If so, how to communicate the change and make sure everyone refers to the latest version? And then Anne responded, what you described is what Zenodo does. You have all the versions and it points to the last, but all of them can still be accessed and part of the collection. I don't know, Anne, do you want to say any more about that?
I mean, that's my understanding. I don't think they call it collection, but they call it data set or something like that. But you indeed have all the version, and you can see all of the version. You can access each of them. They have a different checksum. So this is a different version. So this is probably something like that you want to have. Yeah, yes, maybe with an extension of Stack.
Yeah, that's again a catalog thing, right? So you can have a catalog that links between all the versions basically, and then you can go through them. That is what Stack and the version extension do. But then you have, of course, Stack links that can be moved again.
Yeah.
Alexander here, but I think the point is who should maintain it, and basically who will be spending money to have these resources available. And I think that IPFS or something distributed is the only way to go, because then you share the cost of all these things. Otherwise, if you centralize, then obviously the question is how long is it going to run and who's responsible and all this governance and all that. Is it not? I mean, at the end of the day, you have to have someone who's going to maintain all of this. And so maybe it's something like IPFS. I think someone dropped the link. Is the way to go. Just basically, create a distributed sharing thing and see how it goes.
Something like what did you say, Alexander?
Well, basically build on top of some kind of distributed content frameworks that exist for various things. Essentially do not centralize. Yes, like IPFS.
IPFS, okay. IPFS.
Because
So
you want something that's going to persist and doesn't cost money, or at least, at the first iteration, nobody's asking anyone for money to maintain such a service.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also possible for a commercial service provider to provide these guarantees. I mean, that's essentially what GitHub is, and we're all pretty happy using it.
So Ryan, with your solution though, who's the who's the source of truth when it comes to, okay, you have this commit hash, but what's versioning your data? What system are you using to version and refer back to where the data is actually located?
We created our own.
Okay, yeah, got it. So that would be the answer, is use Earth Mover. No, I mean, like if other data providers implement.
I mean, you're right. It's a service that requires infrastructure to operate. So
yeah,
IPFS is the distributed free version, but still, in order to use IPFS, someone has to pay for the IPFS nodes to run. So that's what Filecoin and the whole crypto ecosystem around it are trying to do. So people can go down that road if they're interested in. If there's anyone who still believes in crypto.
Okay, we should move on, I think, maybe to another question. Cool, so let's go to, because that was just Patrick. Yeah, that was Patrick's question. Okay, so Rich's question, what are the best places to explore small cloud native workflows for free? Ooh, I would say Pangeo, but do people have ideas? Colab.
And who has access to like the Google Pangeo? Is that anyone, or do you have to be added to an
Still
org?
open
Or?
to anyone. Yeah. I don't know how long, I mean, we have no long-term sustainability plan for that, but if anyone just wants to have a notebook in the cloud, I'll post a link to it.
That runs on Google, right?
Yeah, that's on Google.
I guess, Rich, is there a particular like use case that you're thinking of that you feel like you can't satisfy with this current options?
I guess I was just yeah, wondering if there were more things that, I mean, I know that there's like every once in a while I hear about some NSF funded thing, you know, that's providing some kind of like, you know, I don't know, design safe or something, some big thing that, you know, is providing free resource for people for a while, or I don't know what the, you know, story is exactly. And then Pangeo, you know, I know that it ran into some problems before with like, yeah, crypto, or I don't know, you know, something we had to shut it down, or you had to shut it down, Ryan, or something, right? And it popped back up. And but yeah, but it doesn't seem like a super, you know, then there's Binder, but then you know, it doesn't have Dask, and I mean, it doesn't have a cluster, and then there's
Right.
SageMaker Studio Lab, and there's Colab, and I don't know, it just seems like there's a lot of different things, and I was just
It's
wondering.
depending on if you're a student or someone in academia. NSF does have resources like that. There is Cyber's Cacao that does orchestration on cloud and can launch on their own NSF cluster. There is also NSF Jetstream. So Jetstream will allow you to launch your own VMs, which also have the capability that you are admin. So you can do whatever you want, and you actually have GPU enabled machines as well. So there are flavors of those as well. So there are NSF resources, a ton of them. I use exclusively NSF resources if I can, because I don't want to pay anything.
Mm-hmm. And so do you write like a little proposal or something, or how do you get access? Okay.
Yeah, you write a little proposal. It's completely free. You don't have to, like, you basically describe what you're going to do with it. And my allocation, like a startup allocation, is about 100,000 to 200,000 CPU hours. And I got like 400,000 GPU hours on top. And that's my startup allocation. So if you have a pretty decent size, large objective, and that comes with, because I work with geospatial data, like large, so I get like about, I believe, 35, 40 terabytes space volume. So I can do that. And I can also like move around data. Plus they're built on, I think, Internet 2. So they have like 2 to 4 Gbps speed to move around stuff, which is great.
And this is also this is running, like you said, it's on Internet 2, which is awesome, and it's running like at some supercomputer, like TAC or something, or whoever. Or
so it uses everything. It has the capability of using everything, everything that's part of the Exceed program, which has now been named into the Access program under NSF. And then there's also this that I just pasted, which is Jetstream. And if you go to Jetstream's main page, I believe it's like, I think it's like Jetstream. I can't remember what the Jetstream main page is. But if you go to this page, the link that I just pasted, it'll also take you, and it'll give you the capability of like launching your own VMs and making machines. And I use them for my entire catalog. I basically run the Earth Engine catalog, and I will use this for Earth Engine community catalog, not the main catalog. But I use this for processing most of my data.
I'm glad to see Matthias raising his hand, because I was wondering if like
sorry, Matthias. Go ahead.
So I mean, that is pretty much Europe centric, I think, but the ESA network of resources gives you the possibility to apply for like compute, for example, and then you get some credits, for example, on platforms like Eurodata Cube, Open Your Platform, etc. That is, at least for research, etc., is an option as well, but has of course some admin overhead to fill forms, etc.
What is it called?
ESA network of resources.
Oh, right. Okay, cool. And is that publicly, I guess if you're mentioning it because it's publicly accessible, you can sign up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that's like for Europe only, but
yeah. Okay, let's go to this next question by Anonymous. Do you think federated access to all public data in the cloud is technically feasible, if not culturally red tape difficult, i.e. sign-on access? I've wondered this myself, or if there's a way to have sort of single sign-on for different cloud data providers.
Partially it is. I mean, that is what Open Your Platform does, at least for a small subset, where it federates access to the Veto data store, EDC, Sentinel Hub through a single entry point. And authentication is done through EGI Check-in, which is a European authentication provider where most of the universities, for example, are part of, etc.
Yeah, I've seen this EGI login before, but I don't think it exists. Like, would you be able to use it for AWS cloud data? I guess that's publicly accessible, but
probably not yet, no. I mean, you can use all your existing credentials, like you can log in through Open Your Platform, for example, through the EGI check-in, and then use your GitHub credentials or university credentials. But of course, your institution or like the data store needs to support EGI check-in, which probably is not the case for Amazon or so.
right. So if I understand this question correctly, the use case is that the data itself is public, but you have to provide some identity in order to access it. Right.
This was my question, Amy. Sorry, I didn't mean to be anonymous. I just didn't put my name in. Yeah, I mean, in all the meetings that we have with, let's just say NASA, NOAA, and USGS, and everyone's working on their cloud strategies, and the idea of lowering, barriers to science and lowering barriers to access, and what would the kind of dream scenario be that if you had a single sign-on that enabled access to all public data, because let's say, for example, most of these agencies are putting their data in the Amazon cloud, or another cloud environment. Like, does the data in a cloud environment open a door to some kind of federated single sign-on space where you just can query all available data rather than domain, repositories within each of the agencies? I'm just wondering if we just dreamed, is it technically possible, if not incredibly difficult, to make it happen amongst the different amongst the bureaucracies?
That's a policy thing, right? I mean, it's done, technically done in Europe with EGI check-in across different providers. So, I mean, if the policies and people want that, then it's technically possible to do that. But of course, everyone needs to agree on a single entity that manages this, and yeah.
So to me, it sounds like, that those would be the two core problems to solve are cross-catalog search, and then who would be the identity provider. Is that a correct summary? Like, in order to make this possible?
Yeah, I think so.
As far as I know, there's still no stack collection search stack spec. Is that right?
There is a stack collection search specification in very early draft. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that seems like a solvable problem, but solvable, maybe technically difficult, but then, yeah, it sounds to me like all these agencies would need to get together and decide who would be the shared identity provider. It seems like, I don't know, Annie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but ESIP would be a community that could help get those actors together.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and certainly in terms of the neutral space, bringing it up, it just seems like if there's a time to have the conversation, or maybe that's already happening somewhere, it would be as people are working to figure out these new architectures, and that it just seems like a lost opportunity if it's just how do we get our data in the cloud, but we ignore the idea of a broader capacity for search and access to public, open data conversations kind of coming together. So yeah, I think ESIP is a good place to have those conversations. I was just in the is it even technically possible
I think so.
And it sounds like yes.
Amy, I'm trying to find the raise hands on Zoom.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry.
So do you say that who would be the kind of like the identity provider among all the agencies? But I don't think that's the way the industry is looking at this. It's mostly a federation and a trust between the multiple agencies. Each one have their own identity provider. And the only thing they have to do is trust each other, right? So NASA will have an IDP and it will have to federate with the NOAA one, which of course for that we'll have to create a trust between the two agencies, which I don't know if it is happening already or not. But I don't think they have to be forced to each one to consolidate all the IDPs on just one. It's just the federation.
Yeah. Matthias?
I mean, that is country specific again, right? Ideally, you would have that internationally and not just like a US login and a Canada login and a like Germany login, etc. Right? So like similar like what EGI does for Europe, but then broaden to international access, so that otherwise people are can't log in because they're not US citizens or whatever and can't give a US login and so on.
Yeah,
but I think it's a question. Sorry.
No, you go.
I think it's a question of again of do you trust what identity providers are going to be trusted, right? I mean, this is a problem that's already solved with all the social media, right? I can go into LinkedIn with my Gmail password, and I can go into Gmail with my, well, I don't know Gmail. I can go into basically any social media with any of the social media identity because there's a trust there. And so I think it's more of a question of policy, who will organize this, so that what institution would organize this in a way that say, okay, these are all the institutions that we're going to trust as a valid identity provider.
Yeah. Yeah, if I understand what you're saying correctly, it seems to me like if we agree on the protocol for identity exchange, then a lot of the agencies could use their existing systems.
Right, and the protocols are already have been developed and are very used, right? You use either SAML2 or IDC or something like that. So
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, this, I think, Anne, to answer your question, it sounds like, or Annie, sorry, Annie, to answer your question, I think it sounds solvable. It's very difficult to get everybody to exchange those accesses.
I think there's also another nugget in here that shouldn't be lost, which is that it seems like far too much data that is free and open and meant to be distributed as widely and publicly as possible is requiring logins.
Right.
And even though it's a small step, it ends up, we see it over and over, being just enough of an impediment to use. And I don't think it's widely recognized as a usability problem by people that are putting it in front of data. So if we could just reduce the number of places where people need an auth system to those places where we're actually doing some sort of check or users need to accept something, I think that would also just go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I'll say I got my question answered so we can move along, but it sounds like the technically possible, culturally difficult, check, age-old story, but maybe a good space for a session or something at a future ESIP meeting to continue the conversation. So thanks, everyone.
That'd be amazing. Peter, do you mind reading your question that you posted in chat? I understand some people might not have the raise hand option, I guess. Or else I'll read it.
Yeah, thanks. I think I have it somewhere, but I didn't bother to do it. Well, the question with this identification, I think, is a very, very important one. So the primary question, of course, is it generally acceptable to the community that you have to identify to get to the free and open data? Or should that be generally possible also without? Because unless there is a clear yes here, it's difficult to kind of of go any further. But if identification is acceptable, then the question is primarily how to organize that at international level. I think it would be an extremely good discussion to have at the CEOS level. We had loosely coming this topic up, but never in a really structured way. So I would be very interested in getting opinions here.
Ryan?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Peter, and I can speak about it as both like a data user, someone who's really tried to use cloud data, and also then a data provider. We've dabbled into providing cloud data, like our group, for example, manages the CMIP6 in the cloud public data sets in AWS and Google Cloud. And as a user, I don't want any authorization, authentication required to see the data, right? I just want to be able to fetch it over public HTTP routes and just get my data immediately. And that's generally how most of the cloud provider public data set programs work. Like you don't have to even use S3, you can just access them using the S3 HTTP endpoints, you just get the data you want. The flip side is that to become a data provider and to get continuous funding, you need to be able to report on the impacts of who's using your data. And in order to do that effectively, presumably there's statistics in AWS about how frequently data are downloaded, and maybe some regionalization to that. But in terms of specific applications, whether it's to the person or the company or the organization that's using the data, it's just not visible. And that's a real tension we have here to resolve. And I think what I've seen, and maybe you have a perspective on this as coming from the European environment, is in Europe, there's almost all of the data that I want to get is behind some type of authorization, like ECMWF being one of the main sources of data for this community. And that's great for the data provider, but creates a lot of friction for the user. So, what would it take for the data providers to give up this desire to have very fine-grained statistics of who's using their data and just make it available for anyone to use? I'm curious, anyone from the agency perspective on what it would take to get there.
Yeah, we probably should move on, but I feel like, Patrick, you might have a response to this, or do you want to postpone?
Honestly, I'm trying to answer the same question a little bit.
Okay.
So I'd be happy to continue the discussion. I think that's it is kind of the right question to be asking.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. So I'm going to go to Matt's question, which is anyone working on multi-cloud deployments, tagging, labels, infrastructure as code? I will say that the multi-cloud deployment that I'm aware of is, again, Pangeo in a sense. But Matt, if you don't mind maybe saying a little bit more about what you mean about tagging and labels and what that's needed for. Do we have Matt?
I saw another question at the very bottom that Matt had to drop. If it was Matt Austin's question.
Okay.
Yeah. He had to drop, but he said he was psyched to be in the mix.
Nice. So, a few people did upvote this. So did anybody who upvoted it want to, well, first of all, does anybody have an answer? Are they working on multi-cloud deployments? But if anybody who upvoted it wanted to add more context to why they're interested in this question, please speak up.
Do you think this means deployment of, Pangeo framework, or whatever you want to call it, the Jupyter hub with, Dask or something on Kubernetes, or something else?
Yeah, to me, it sounds kind of like what, 2I2C is doing too, or QHub. You can sort of.
Well, and Amy, if I have a chance here, because this is a presentation that I have been, that I talked to Rick the other day about doing for the Pangeo, if they're interested, in terms of the approach that I'm doing with the with Crossplane. Mm-hmm. So I'm working on a not only multi-cloud, but multi also consider multi-public cloud and private cloud with cross-plane and universal control plane. It's a large topic, but basically it's a way to abstract the cloud provider's API to make it much easier for the scientists or for the DevOps to be able to deploy this infrastructure just by filling, a couple of fields in a YAML file. But I think if anybody's interested in this universal control plane approach, I'll be willing to do a demo and show how you can deploy an HPC connected to Jupyter Hub very easily. But
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else is using cross-plane or something similar.
I haven't used it, but I see we have a number of hands up, and I think the first was Sudhir.
Hey, so I also actually upvoted. So, from our perspective, from the, use case perspective is like, as a government, like a lot of the times, like we are working with the multi-cloud provider, CSPs, right? So, when we're building the services and our capabilities around one single service provider, but we're also looking at like, we have other service providers that we need to work even internally with our projects and compute, right? So a lot of the times, like, our funding mechanism may change, and sometimes we may or may have to move from one cloud provider to other providers, right? And that could be a challenge because once you're vested to develop into one ecosystem, and it's difficult to get back to another ones, right? So we're trying to figure out if there is or even if I need to run my compute, like, can I use the multi-cloud clouds to run my analytics on the top of that, right? So those are something we're actually trying to figure out, and that's why like a multi-cloud comes in a lot into the play when we sort of like make a decision or plan on our projects. So I mean, I have seen a couple of efforts around like those are possible, but I'm at least from my perspective, I'm interested to see what's out there.
Yeah. Matthias?
So I mean, I guess multi-cloud deployment means you have a single kind of interface to different providers, right? So that if you want to switch from some workflow from AWS to Google, then you don't need to change anything except changing maybe the URL to it or something like that. And if that's the case, of course, OpenIO is what you might be looking for, or any of the like processing standards like OGC API processes or WCPS or so, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sam?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, since we were talking about open cloud providers, but also like open services from NSF, Kakao is one of those services that allows for orchestration, like launching a Jupyter Hub across AWS, GCS, whatever you want. And it works in conjunction with the NSF has this thing called Cloud Bank, where when you're writing a proposal, you can actually write for basically like cloud credits on different commercial clouds. And the Cloud Bank from NSF will basically allocate that for you. And then you can launch that using these services. The beauty of this is you don't have to write orchestration. This service will do orchestration for you, depending on what your compute needs are. So it'll actually auto configure on whatever cloud you want to launch something on. Just pasting the link here.
Nice. Thank you.
All right.
Cool. All right. Okay, so the next one is also anonymous. Annie, was this, well, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to call it anybody. Seems like a lot of cloud computing discussion and development are in Python, at least within ESIP. How can we be more inclusive with other programming languages? That's a hard question. Anybody have an opinion about that? I see Sam, is your hand still up from last time? Or... Matthias.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the answer again could be an API layer in between, like OGC API processes or OpenIO, where in OpenIO you can work with Python or JavaScript or R or whatever client you have, and then it translates into a JSON document that describes the workflow, and you can send it to different backends. You can even translate the JSON document between languages, so that enables, of course, collaboration between employees that or scientists that are knowledgeable of different programming languages in the end. Or you need something that is more like, for example, what was it called? Python array specification or something like that. Ryan might know that better, where you define a common API interface for something like X-array across languages and have just this, let's say, a similar looking interface to such processing tools.
Yeah. I mean, I guess a hot take would be, what are the barriers for more people using Python? Or is that the wrong answer?
I would be interested to hear more like what the person who asked this means. Like all of our data formats, which is kind of the foundation for all this cloud native stuff, none of them are Python specific. So I don't know, like what is really meant that like, are we talking about I don't parse that question. Like there's a lot of people using R, there's a lot of people using Julia. I think this community tends to use Python because Python's got a big ecosystem, but I don't see any of the technologies or tools as fundamentally Python specific.
But maybe it's like, you know, I know Martin was working on like his FS spec implementation in Rust last week. You know, maybe that's an example of something that's kind of working at, you know, providing some of the advances that we made on the Python side to the rest of the community.
And then, I mean, the file format itself, it's good to exchange data, but then if you have persons working on like the algorithms, the workflows, right, that is still pretty specific to the programming languages.
Well, it's definitely heard that we need to make sure we continue to support other programming languages. Okay, I'm going to move on to Stace at WHOI. What does that say? That's a oceanographic?
Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Hi.
Right. Okay, cool. Welcome.
Hui.
I love it. Okay, I'm excited about this question. Retraining programs to help people new to cloud native computing. What would you recommend online resources with examples in the earth, especially ocean sciences? And I'll just also footnote this question with, we did have Paige Martin on earlier, but I know that it was kind of a big ask for her to join because she was on a train to DC. And we were thinking about this in the context of how do we provide sort of cloud computing resources to people around the globe. So, but yeah, let's answer this question first. Would you recommend, what online courses would y'all recommend to people who are trying to get an understanding of how to do cloud native computing?
This is the same question pretty much that I had down, like 2 questions down too. So it covers the same issue.
Yeah.
But we actually had a really interesting discussion at the end of the Pangeo showcase talk about this because, you know, there's like people who teach courses, right, for students who know nothing about Python, like Tim Crone and Ryan's course, and then, you know, then they spend a whole semester and, you know, builds up slowly. And there's also then like, you know, Deepak, you know, gives a 1-hour X-array tutorial to, you know, Ocean Hack Week or something, and then Digital Earth Africa and everything in between, like, you know, it's, but it seems like somehow, we know in this discussion, there were people who had done all sorts of these different types, have been involved with all these different efforts, and there's, including Paige, you know, with TOPS and OpenScapes, and, you know, but it seems like somehow there has to be some patterns that kind of emerge for like different and, you know, best sort of approaches for different types of people, because you really have to find out who you're talking about, right? When you say what kind of experience they have and what kind of time commitments and all that they're going to have before you recommend some online training for them, I feel like. But, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, Stace, I do have one tutorial that I've given to Ocean Hack Week participants before on Intro to Cloud. And I know there's a lot of other tutorials, like I'm thinking actually of like Ryan Abernathey, your tutorial on Intro to XAR, and there's one on X-ray that we could probably also just send to you to see if that
Amy,
helps. Yeah.
Amy, can we actually document those in here so that
Yeah.
everybody has access to those? That would be
I will add those. The other thing I was going to say was this is also, I think, a really good example of why we need the data integrity, you know, sort of what were we calling it? The data references that we were talking about earlier, because if you're running that code, like, you know, the X-ray tutorial that's a year old and the data that it references is, you know, an old reference, then the tutorial might not work. So anyways, just a thought. Did somebody raise a hand?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this. You talk about intro to cloud, but based on the examples of training that you are providing, it's more of intro to basically dealing with that data that is in the cloud, not so much the cloud as an infrastructure and data provider. But yes, no, is that was the question? No, it's more about for the students to know more about the data that is in the cloud, or the cloud as an infrastructure provider in general.
Are you talking about the difference between like teaching about the principles of cloud versus teaching about a specific cloud provider?
Well, I don't know if the question was in relation to the people were asking, how can I learn more about the cloud? Like any of the cloud providers or private clouds, or the question was more in the sense of how can I learn more about how to access this data that is being hosted in the cloud. It was a specific, what are the two things are? Is it to learn more about the cloud in general, or to learn more about data that is being hosted in the cloud?
Yeah. I don't know, Stace, did you want to say more specifically what you're looking? Oh, you actually suggested like the PODAC one. So any other details about what types of content you're looking for?
It's more that people at my institution are curious about this concept of cloud native computing and data in the cloud, but it's essentially like we want to see examples of how that is, you know, and making science, you know, how are other people doing that, using that in their research? And then when we see the examples, we want to know how to get started. So I'm really looking for like very introductory materials, often with examples that people can see themselves in.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We are running out of time. In case people have to jump off right at the top of the hour, I just want to say thank you for joining. I'm going to stick around to make sure we finish people's thoughts. This was like the first time running an Ask Me Anything, so I'm definitely open to feedback if you have it. I'd like to, I think this is a good way of actually generating organic discussion and getting ideas from different places. So I think there might be another version of this that we pursue in the future to make sure that we're getting these types of questions asked and answered in real time. So yeah, just wanted to say that before people had to drop off. Sam?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I teach hackathon courses, and I also actually teach at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology on oceans. And usually the way in which I teach relies on where does the data actually exist. So sometimes it is platform specific, right? So if I know that a platform already has the computational tool, batteries included, I don't have to install anything like Earth Engine or Planetary Computer, I will teach them in that. But then if I want them to learn also like basics of how to get Argo floats data using PyArgo or ArgoPy or whatever it's called, or if they want to get buoy data from SOFR Ocean or Aqualink using some API, then I'll also go through like notebooks that are more specifically designed to be launched locally. For me, the question is reliant on the data and the compute, right? Because I also don't want them to be in a situation where they feel like, oh, the data is all free, but the compute actually costs something. PODAC will actually write that, right? On the FAQ, it says that we expect you to pay for the compute, which means that it's not a end-to-end solution for someone who's getting started and maybe does not have resources to actually pay for compute to begin with. So yeah, this is my approach. Yeah.
Somebody, oh yeah, Ramon.
Yes, and actually I'm seeing this every time that we onboard somebody on the NASA Science Cloud, Science NC, I see that all the time with the scientists. They try to, or some of them try to basically follow the same approach that they use with the in-house infrastructure. And they realize that when they move to the cloud, everything's more expensive, right? And it is. So what we have been doing is doing a lot of hands-on training and training with examples. But that question is very, very important because I've seen many groups that thought that cloud was going to solve all their budgetary problems, but then they realized that that's not the case. It's just because they are not using, like this serverless technology, for instance, for doing data processing or things like that are more cloud native. One thing that I can tell you as a cloud practitioner for basically since NASA deployed the in-house cloud is that try to avoid any of the training that the cloud providers offers, like the typical AWS, cloud practitioner and all that, because those are just it's gonna make the user waste their time. I think it's better to do hands-on and try to do a proof of concept more than just going to one of these online training like Cloud Academy and things like that.
Well, this is
really... I have learned more from my peers than from going to any of these cloud training, right?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Yeah, in general, I think I have learned more from doing sitting together with one of my peers, learning how to for instance, do event trigger processing of data in the cloud, for instance, than to just go to a cloud academy or one of those places that is gonna take you from the beginning and you're gonna learn a lot of things that are not useful.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but I still think that this was really helpful actually in generating some new lines of discussion that we don't typically cover. I think with like knowledge sharing sessions, we usually just show up with solutions opposed to ask questions like that you would broadly ask in architectural meetings, maybe within our teams. So I'm still trying to synthesize like what would be the best format for having these sort of cross-agency discussions that I think ESIP is a really good place for. And I also really want to say thank you to Matthias and Anne coming and presenting the European the perspective of the European countries as well, because that is super helpful. Both in seeing like your guys' experiences and tools, as well as identifying how some of our solutions are not going to work outside of US context. So I really appreciate that. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for staying a few minutes over, and yeah, hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Amy.
Bye. Thanks, Amy.